This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hello, Breaking Banks Europe listeners, and welcome to episode 112. You're stuck with me, Nina Mohanty, founder of Blue Money today, but I am really excited for this episode because it's something that is very personally relevant to my own life. And today in episode 112, we are going to be speaking about niche banking, or niche banking, as my American counterparts seem to like to refer to it as. This episode is going to be in two parts, and one is going to be more of a kind of trend and setting the scene for you. And then my colleague MJ, Meaghan, is going to pick up with an interview with someone building a niche banking product for musicians over at Nerve. But to start, I'm super thrilled to welcome our guest today, Rik from Banking Scene. First question, Rik, please can you pronounce your surname for us so that I don't have to butcher it?
Sure. My surname is Coeckelbergs.
There you go. Say that.
Yes, Dutch. Fast. Quite difficult for English-speaking people, I'm told.
Indeed. But Rik, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Would you mind just giving a quick introduction, elevator pitch about yourself so that our audience knows a little bit more about you?
My name is Rik Coeckelbergs. I'm the founder and managing director of the Banking Scene, which started as a conference when I worked at a bank myself. So for 2 years, I combined organizing a conference with a full-time job in a bank as a product manager, daily banking. But the moment that we reached about 350 people, I decided to spend the time more on a professional basis, leave the bank aside, and predominantly to get some more freedom of speech in creating my personal vision on the future of banking. This is the main driver for this banking scene. During the pandemic, I needed to adapt. There were no longer conferences, but luckily I created the Banking Scene After Work, which are weekly virtual roundtable sessions on anything related to banking. And we had many CEOs and other executives from both banks and financial services providers and software providers. And coincidentally, last year, purposeful banking was a big part of the central theme of our virtual roundtables. And then you get very quickly to niche banking as well, which I will explain later in this session. I'm super excited to be here because Breaking Banks Europe was very high on my list of to attend podcasts one day or another.
Perfect. Well, I'm so glad that we got to have you on. I think just to set the scene, if you're active or curious about the fintech space, you'll have seen a rise of a lot of B2C fintech groups. Actually, just yesterday or Monday, Octopus Ventures, based here in the UK, but investing across Europe, shared some of their fintech predictions for 2022. And the first group that they referred to was specialty fintech. And so there's a lot of names for what we're going to discuss, but they talked about the first wave of neobanks kind of launching around 2015, 2016. They've all kind of grown up. Many of them are eyeing perhaps an IPO or, taking huge sums of money here and there, really hitting their stride. But what they were predicting was that we have reached a point that has allowed us to serve specialty groups, they called them, but probably we'll refer to them as niche groups. And we've seen that in the US, definitely, with different neobanks, such as Daylight, which serves LGBT plus communities, First Boulevard or Greenwood, which serve the Black communities in the US. But here as well, and we're going to have an interview with Nerve, but I myself am building a proposition for migrant communities. So, Rik, I wonder if you could share with us, what is niche banking, and why is it happening now?
Well, coincidentally, we had a virtual roundtable on exactly this topic exactly 12 months ago. To me, niche banking is, what it says. It's focusing your banking activities on a very niche in the market. You could also call it focus banking, or as you say, expertise banking, where a group of people sets up a bank, but really focuses on a very particular segment. The example that was given last year was a bank that our special guests were at that moment building in Switzerland, specifically for dentists. Just as an example. And today we see rise. They're all popping up everywhere. But as such, it's not very new. I think back of... I contributed to Chris Skinner's new book. Will come out in June. It's Digital for Good, talking about purposeful banking, etc. And one of the contributors, next to myself, one of the contributors, they started with a cooperative bank for teachers. It's not new. It's pretty old, and reminded me of another cooperative bank here that started back in the days when women were not able to go working yet, etc. So a very long time ago, but that bank was really set up to group everyone that needed some kind of insurance, and they started building the insurance themselves, and that later evolved to a bank. Big difference with today, of course, is back then there was no software. Today there is, and software has democratized a lot. It's becoming increasingly cheaper, making it a lot more easy to build a bank, or at least to build a banking proposition. I'm not saying they're building a bank. Maybe they're not getting a license. They're looking for a license somewhere else, but they have all the tools available on the market to build a bank proposition at a much lower cost than 5 to 10 years ago.
That's so true. I was actually up in Edinburgh at the end of last year, and it was like a fast fashion store, but the building itself was the beautiful facade, and it said like the Linen Workers Bank.
Yep.
It was a bank that was for people that actually worked in the linen factories. And I thought that was brilliant. But it really goes to show that there is nothing really new under the sun, is there? There was a time when you had guilds, right? And you had the gold workers guilds and the glazer guilds, and everyone kind of effectively had their own bank. The miners had their own bank in Wales and all across the country. And similarly, I think we're seeing a resurgence of this. I tend to agree with you that what has changed is software. I'm curious, from your perspective, and you're very obviously very interested in fintech and different players in the space, but are there any particular players that you think are making it easier to not have to necessarily be a bank, but to get a proposition up and running quickly?
Absolutely. Then there's the classical banking as a service propositions that you have in the market today, and started with fintechs that built this kind of proposition. Now, increasingly more, we also see incumbent banks starting to build that. So Stationale is one example, but recently also start promoting their own offering.
Wow.
And I think coming back to the previous question, what is also different back then compared to today in terms of niche banking is back then, these people didn't have a banking service, so they needed to be served. Today, often, these niche banks, their clients, their niche is being served by a bank, but they can do better. And this by focusing on the best possible products, best possible values, and also thinking out of the box, going out of the classical banking and making sure that they can go to these banking as a service companies for regular banking activities. That way, being capable of focusing on a lot more value-added services. Like the bank for dentists, they were thinking of on a mid-long term to also build some kind of marketplace where they can purchase all the required tools a dentist needs, but at a much lower price because they can group all the purchases together. And that's where real value can be created by niche banks, and a lot less by incumbents because they have too much different troubles to take care of.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really interesting segue, what your point there, into the opportunities and the challenges that you have if you're serving a niche group of people.
Yeah.
I think, to lay out what I've seen, oftentimes with B2C fintech today, people say that you just end up taking venture capital and throw it at Google, at Facebook, and you're using ads. And to be fair, I don't know if it's because I work in fintech or I talk about it far too much, but every other ad on my Instagram is a new fintech company, right? So perhaps having that niche group, that community, allows for almost a protected a moat of around your community, right? Mm-hmm. If you know how to distribute to them, then that gives you kind of an edge in the situation.
Yeah.
Conversely, though, what you mentioned was very true. Before, it was people who didn't have a bank account, who didn't have services. And now everyone has too many options, perhaps, right? I can open 5 new bank accounts this afternoon, sat on my sofa. So how do you then become the center of your customer's world? How do you get that coveted role of being where the paycheck goes each month, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, Rik, what do you see as opportunities and challenges?
I think that's the biggest challenge indeed. There is so much going on. And because software gets so cheap, it's much easier to start building a bank, meaning that there's also a lot more crap in the market, so to say. The main challenge for these niche banks, because their target has already a bank account, is convincing their target to switch from banks. And we know from many challengers how difficult switching is. Most of these challenger banks, they're a second bank or maybe a third bank, but the salary still goes to the big incumbent because they are the trusted, sometimes evil partner for financial services. Because despite the high charges, the mediocre service, they have proven for years and sometimes decades to be a trusted financial service provider. So that is, I think, the biggest challenge. And banks that can successfully prove their relevance for their market in such a way that customers start referring the bank to others, that's where I think the magic happens. Absolutely. And I'm not just talking about some kind of cashback if you bring someone else back, but really like honest feedback from one individual to the other, sharing how good bank A or B is.
Now, one of the things, that you have an excellent insight to, especially from your roundtables, but throughout your career, you get to speak to a lot of the very senior people, if not executives, at large banks, large incumbent banks. And, I think with large incumbent banks, whether because of regulation or just shifts in policy, there has been an aggregation where you've got 4 or 5 really big players. In the UK, we've got the CMA9, of course, but each country kind of has its main players.
The big 4.
The big 4, right. So if you are sitting in, your tower or working from home, whatever, but working for one of these really large banks, how do they compete? Because they are building products that are one size fits all, aren't they? So how do they solve for this? And how do they serve these niche groups in the way that is tailored and bespoke for these niche communities if they really have to build a product that serves millions?
I think the way it is today is it's a one size fits all indeed, but it's also a size that offers everything. Not tailored to a niche, but very often good enough. So if you, as in very particular SME need to decide, as a dentist, for example, am I going to go for my dentist bank, which has a very niche offering, or do I go to an incumbent bank that can offer everything from the beginning? That's the choice that you as a customer have to make. And that's where the advantage and the disadvantage lies of big incumbent banks. They offer everything, but of course, the one size fits all. And that is very often compared to a niche product offering, which is very particular and not always a complete banking offering.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's one thing that might be more important to people as they realize, an e-money license is not the same as a banking license.
Probably
Right?
a reason why Revolut started as a
Exactly.
bank instead of an e-money license. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I wanted to touch on is we're going to dip our toes into Web3 because I think you and I, Rik, we probably have opinions. But I would not go so far as to call myself an expert.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about communities within Web3. I was quite fortunate to have been gifted an NFT of one of the crypto coven witches. And that was very, very nice of that person to gift it to me. But, the worth of some of these, the floor, they call it, of some of these witches is now 2 ETH, right? And that's far more expensive than, your everyday person can actually afford. I think the other thing, is there's lots of discords that you can join now. Lots of talks of DAOs and distributed autonomous organizations.
Yep.
And they all kind of purport themselves to be communities. So from your perspective, whether you're an incumbent, whether you're crypto curious, whether you're just really enthusiastic about fintech, how do we think about that? Is there a divide? Is it the same thing just in Web3? Or how are you thinking about communities in Web3 and how they are different to what is currently happening in niche banking?
Honestly, I'm still figuring out the answer to that question.
We all are.
And I don't really know what direction is going to go. What you clearly see is that Web3 is going, they are aiming at being more community-based or even individual-based. Yeah. Nevertheless, I think the role of a bank, essentially, and we often forget that, is about risk management. Question is Web3 going to be enough to manage all the risk that we as consumers or businesses have when lending money or saving money and ensuring that we can get the money back, or that in case we are lending, that the counterparty can be sure enough to get a return on the money they shared? Today, that is, of course, in an old school way, managed by banks. I haven't seen yet how that will change in the future. There's a lot of theory going on. On the other hand, we had the same point of view in the time that these peer-to-peer lending platforms popped up. And
True.
Just the past 12 months that you see one after the other changing their business model because they don't get enough traction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Future will tell. I think it's still very early to make a decision about that. And it's clear that that's going to be one of the topics for this year around our virtual roundtables, as well as the conferences of the banking scene, because I want to know more about it.
Yes, there you go. Well, I think that's a great place for us to wrap up here, Rik. Thank you so much for joining me and for giving us an insight into how you're thinking about niche banking, purposeful banking. Where can our audience find out more about you and banking scene?
That will be predominantly LinkedIn through my name.
Yeah.
Rik Coeckelbergs, Rik Coeckelbergs, or the company name, The Banking Scene, or our website. That's where I share every week my opinion, or at least the feedback of our virtual roundtables. So also the whole wide world can learn in a curated way what we discussed under Chattermouse rules around our virtual table.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again for joining us. And
thank you for inviting
listeners, make sure you stay tuned for Meaghan's chat with Nerve. Thanks so much.
Do you want to be part of Breaking Banks Europe? Reach out and learn more about the opportunity to be featured in one of our shows. With over 1.6 million listeners and counting, Breaking Banks Europe is bound to become the place to advance critical dialogue in Europe and the UK fintech scene. Reach out on Instagram or Twitter at BreakingBanksEU or go to www.provoke.fm.
Welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe. This is episode 112, which is all about niche banking. I am Meaghan Johnson, one of your co-hosts, taking over part 2 of this episode from Nina Mohanty. And as promised, part 2 is going to speak to one of the founders of one of these incredible niche banks. And in the birthday episode, we actually mentioned Nerve, so it's really excited to get Nerve on and hear what they're up to, why playing in this niche banking space is so important, and how they're looking to make the lives of artists much easier. So big welcome to John Waupsh, co-founder of Nerve. Thank you so much for joining us today, John.
Hey, thank you. Excited to be here.
Great. So for our listeners who may have never heard of Nerve, what's the elevator pitch? What are you looking to do? And I guess kind of what's the background? How did you become involved in launching a bank for artists? Are you an artist? Were you a banker?
All those questions, right? So I can start from the end first, or from the beginning first, which is I went to school to Chicago, in Chicago as a liberal arts school, and almost instantly, this was in the 90s, almost instantly I became friends with some pretty well-known DJs. And to be honest, it looked really easy. So I thought maybe I could do that and pay my way through school. And I learned 2 things that have been pretty much constant in my life for the last 20 something years. First of all, I'm not a good DJ. And the second one was, even at that time, it was really challenging for me to get a bank account for that business.
Yeah.
And just a checking account it was impossible. and to be quite frank, it's still that difficult today. But where what ultimately ended up happening was I became kind of obsessed with music that was recorded but never actually released by artists who were kind of lost to time. And my hope in the mid to late 90s was I could kind of stockpile these acetates and reels, and one day the world would get small enough where I could actually connect the dots between who recorded this material and who owned this stuff and help them make money. And so anyway, that's been a passion project of mine for quite a while. So life went on, and around 2005 or so I got into fintech and enjoyed the last, whatever that is, 18 years or so in financial technology, primarily building products and leading R&D and UX initiatives. And then what this whole time, though, I've had a couple of record labels with some other business partners where we are effectively kind of matching up, finding these artists and helping them make money on their asset. And it's just been a labor of love. There's no money in it on my side. It's a money losing proposition for me, but ultimately, we help these artists make some money. And so what Nerve is just the combination of these 2 passions. The passion of helping creators create these and maintain sustainable businesses, and then the power of using the power of financial technology to create kind of an accessibility to the banking system and to finances that doesn't currently exist for creators.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, congratulations on, finally being able to go back to your first passion. I think everyone, when they're finished with uni, they're like, oh, I want to do this, but then they have to pay the bills. And yeah, super great that it all comes full circle. That's really interesting. So, I mean, yeah, I've been doing a lot of research into fintech, bank, and kind of broader tech offerings into the creative space. So, we're not just seeing like new kind of neo banks for broad creatives. We're seeing like niche propositions within niche banking. So we see Carrot, which is focused towards like very, very, very established influencers. Also in this space, we have like Indify, BeatBread. We see some propositions for photographers. And what I really like is that like this is the first time I think I'm starting to see like proper relevant services for the customers being integrated into a bank account. So it's not just a debit card, a credit card, some savings pots. So what are some of the features that Nerve has that kind of go beyond banking for musicians?
Yeah, one of the, I guess when the question behind your question, perhaps that I think a lot of people have is why so, why take a focus and, make that aperture so tight? Why are you focusing on such a, an industry of 15 million or so creators instead of the 50 million plus, in the general creator economy or even broader? We always, I think anytime you start anywhere, you need to start, you actually have to solve problems. And that's ultimately what your question is. What are the problems that are so specific to music that maybe don't exist in other genres, right? And so, in my opinion, whenever you start too broad, you never actually solve the real problems. Instead, what you end up doing is kind of, offering that solution, looking for a problem, the old slap that we love to talk about. And so when we look at our initial focus, which is of course music, we had to we have to look at what are those issues with banking. The first one to be, I kind of kicked it off is if I'm a musician today and I want to treat I want to treat my livelihood or my passion as a business, that necessarily means I cannot run my life through a payments app. When I run my life, or several payments app, when I run my financial life that way, I end up running into tax issues. Maybe I've paid certain expenses to session artists, session musicians, or what have you, through Venmo, and I forget to cull those at the end of the year, and I don't get to take credit for it, all the way up to much bigger issues. But those types of challenges occur because if I go and try to get a traditional bank account, the bank necessarily wants me to be a business that has 5 employees,
of course,
has a lot of fee income that it can drive for the institution. And the underlying components of that are the bank has infrastructure costs and branch costs and all of those other costs that ultimately add up, and they need a way to pay for it. So what that necessarily means is, as an artist, I go to the bank and I say, cool, whether I'm in person or digitally, I want a business checking account, and they say, oh yeah, we'll help you out. Just give us this paperwork, articles of incorporation, Secretary of State, EIN, a urine analysis, whatever. Give us all this stuff, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to need $3,500 a month on deposit, and if we don't do that, then we'll charge you $15 a month. And so that's the reason why all these creators effectively go to these payment apps. Mm-hmm. And so we said, well, first thing we need to do is just solve the make it super easy and fast to open a business checking savings account. So we do that inside of about 20 seconds. So when
that's really fast.
Really freaking fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really, really proud of the mechanisms that we built. But like my background, I mean, in 2006, I and my team created one of the first digital account opening tools for banks and credit unions in the country. And so we have a lot of experience in this space. My partner and I have been working together in this space for nearly 17 years, tied at the hip. Wow. So this is, it's a lot of the stuff, whether it's lending or onboarding, is kind of, we're very familiar with the tools of the trade and what should be done. Thanks to 11FS, actually, we studied a lot of the stuff that you guys have put out. I want to say, is it called Pulse? What was the online system where I was able to kind of do like Netflix for usability?
Pulse was my baby. I built Pulse before I left. Yeah, so
I love that product. Yeah. That was a great product. That was incredible. I don't know if it's still around, but that was awesome. I certainly anyway. Thank you for that. But at any rate, that's definitely a level of fintech nerd that must be inside of you to create that product. But now I'm going to turn the show around.
I have onboarding journeys like forever ingrained in my brain. I can recall probably about 50 different fintechs, end-to-end application journeys and functionalities. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
it's a great thing. It's a great thing. But at any rate, so we make it incredibly easy to open these accounts, right? And so after you download the app, as I mentioned, it's 20 or 30 seconds, and then to turn on the savings account is less than a second. And so that's the first challenge. But so then what? So when we talk to these guys, there's another kind of overarching issue, which is a big one, not just in music, but it's elsewhere in creative. Is the number of streams, the payment streams, is almost overwhelming. So so if I'm just a musician starting out, I may get paid by 5 to 10 different places, and those payment streams may not be very big; they may be small. But and also they occur at different times during the year. Some are monthly, some are quarterly, some are annually, some are every 2 years. And some, depending upon the company, maybe weekly. But what that necessarily causes is confusion. If did a payment hit? What's the rationalization on it? Is it what it should be? All these sorts of questions. So we have some different intelligence that we put in that for the creator. But and there's a number of different things that we do there to kind of help them, help make that easier. Also, we have a lot of data that we enhance the app with that's very specific to this set that otherwise is inaccessible to them or expensive. And again, we provide it free. Our entire product is free to the music creator, and there are no fees other than if you go to an out of network ATM. We have about 55,000 ATMs that you can go to fee free. But the big one that is it's actually quite a difficult challenge to solve, and very, very unique, is when you're in music. Music is a very collaborative medium, right? And whether we're in a band together or maybe we co-wrote a song together, and we did it once, and that song receives revenue ideally from ASCAP or something like that, maybe from other sources. Where does that money go? Does it go into your account? And then I'm supposed to trust you with what the payments were. And then you have to provide me paperwork to show me how much or how little money it was. Or if we're in a band, I can't tell you the number of bands that have broken up over over money issues and infighting related to it and all the other stuff, or groups that have had these issues. And so, because music is inherently collaborative, but banking is totally not. We realize there's a really weird challenge there. So we have a very unique, a lot of like interesting sort of IP around the creation of, think of it as like they are shared accounts with so you can gin up an FDIC insured account and bring in various people, your bandmates, your songwriters, what have you, and then give them very easily a variety of permissions.
Nice.
Meaghan, we trust with a debit card, but we saw what John did with one last time, so he could just look at the money. Yeah. And that's it's a very unique product, part of the product feature, and it's something that that definitely amongst musicians has become a big reason why they see aside from our user interface, aside from our user experience, and aside from our overall focus, they see that as just a very sort of really deep understanding of their lives. And we're really proud of that. And so anyway, so that collaborative tool is, we call it collabs, but and it makes it really, really easy if you get paid as a band to then pay out your bandmates.
Yeah, of course.
There's a whole host of sort of use cases that jump off of that. But those are some, for a start, those are some ways that we solve those problems.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, the thing for me that really stood out was the collabs. I think that's super fantastic. And also that kind of tracking the different kind of royalties and streams of revenue. I think regardless of what type of creator you are, if you sit within this kind of more, freelance type space, it's like, okay, I should be getting paid this amount at this time, but I'm probably not going to. So any kind of, insights that can help you better prepare for, when you have really good months and really bad months, I think that's definitely super important. I wanted to ask, because I know that, like, thinking about another kind of area of financial services and banking that, artists may have been, discriminated for in the past is, if you think about an artist, they probably, only a handful have made it super big when they're like really young, but you always think of, the struggling musician and everything. Sure. So, yeah. Perhaps they're more likely to have some debt. They're pursuing their passion. They may not have consistent kind of, income and everything. Yep. So how do you see perhaps yourselves in the future or some of your kind of peers helping artists become get on the credit ladder, access loans, it may not be traditional loans, but something like, buy now, pay later if they need to purchase new equipment or something. Because again, something that really stood out for me with Carrot is that they base their credit limits based on the number of followers that the influencers have. So how do you see this kind of evolving for the musicians?
I want to be like, I think this is where we differ from probably I know we differ from any other creator or music focused product in the space. I believe that we should be an enabler of these products and services, not actually build these products and services. So if you think about Carrot or a distributor who has to ultimately pay artists, or a name your company, a marketing company that helps artists, whatever. We have APIs, a set of APIs that we're bringing to market here within a few weeks that are publicly accessible by any company, whether it's an app company or a very large company or startup or what have you. who can use our APIs to help facilitate instant payments, or instant advances, or access, for instance, the balance of users, transactional activity of users, if a user, of course, says that they want to share it. And that enables a whole host of use cases for anyone in the creator economy, not just music, to utilize our Rails to build really incredible experiences, offers, credit offers, etc., for users, for creators. So while we have the base account and we have some really amazing services on the base account, we also presume that we can't create everything, nor do we want to.
Yeah.
And we know that there are some really amazing lending opportunities that already exist out there, advance opportunities that exist.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to create advances. We don't want to power, we want to power it. So what we want to do is allow those advance companies, the royalty advance companies, or whoever they may be, to lend their money, but use our Rails to get that money to the artists instantly, and to use our Rails to create really interesting services, whether it's credit focused or otherwise. And so for instance, inside of our APIs, companies will be able to easily allow artists to create Nerve accounts inside of their own ecosystems, inside of their apps.
Cool.
They'll be able to, almost the artist may not ever have to come to our app, unless, if they want to, obviously, there may be some additional reasons that they would want to, but give it, our entire modus operandi is, how do we empower these artists, with as many, incredible options as possible to lead and grow their financial lives. And we believe that artists have been left out of economic dignity, as well as access, because companies and people's egos get in the mix. And so we'd much rather just be those rails that help empower other companies to create really brilliant products, rather than us try to own everything ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that sounds really exciting, and I think a very, kind of sensible, innovative approach to take. So I guess thinking about this kind of sector within niche banking, even the subsector. So, I mean, the creative economy is huge, only expected to grow significantly. It's becoming there's a lot of providers in this space. There's some in Indonesia and Singapore. We have some in the UK and Europe. What do you think it will take to succeed in this increasingly saturated space for neobanks and fintechs looking to service the creative community?
It's funny. I wish I could credit this quote effectively. I literally read it yesterday. But all you have to do is create products that people want, and treat your customers with respect they deserve, and you solve the problem. That's really what I think it takes, right? It takes first of all, creators in general, the opportunity is yes, it's large because creators have been by and large left out. And so, keeping a focus on, on what their needs are and what their challenges are, and solving those challenges in ways that benefit them. I mean, we don't make money off the creator. We make our money through the rails that I just talked about, through the providing entities and companies with a cheaper, faster access point. So they win and we win, right? And that ultimately the creator wins because they get all this amazing stuff. And so anytime you can find where those, win-win or win-win-wins are, that's necessarily the right mix. It's not easy, but, and there, to your point, there are I think there's a lot of companies operating in a space because the opportunity is as big as it is, and that's it's the other day I was on a podcast and effectively I said, if bankers had just actually paid attention to these creators, we wouldn't have to do any of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a damn shame that we even have our jobs, to be honest. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to help be part of that change through the process.
Yeah, well, I think it's much needed. I mean, I kind of, something that really stuck with me when you kind of said, the amount of bands that like split up because of financial and these kind of issues. I think I don't know, something that just kind of popped into my head was that, your bank is keeping, or your banking proposition is helping to keep bands together. So I think that's, if that's not a huge customer job for musicians, then I don't know what is. I guess my last question is, what does the future hold for Nerve? What can we look forward to? Where do you see yourself in maybe 3-5 years in terms of the proposition?
I think you'll, at some point here, you'll see us expand outside of music and solve other problems for other creators. But our primary knitting is, again, the rails that I've talked about, and partnering with as many different companies as possible to enable everything from faster payments, instant payments, to and instant credit and those types of things, to enabling found royalties for artists who are never credited. There's a lot of companies working on that problem, and the question that I'm always left with is well, where does that money go once you actually credit them? And we'd love to help facilitate that. So anyway, there's 100 million plus creators out there. There's it's growing, thankfully. Yeah. I think as well, what we're going to see is we're going to see a stronger push towards a broader demographic in the creator economy, which is excellent. I think there's been a lot of data around, like, for instance, YouTube creators primarily being white males because of the access and to internet and all of the costs of the microphones and everything else. And you're starting to see some really interesting companies create interesting products to help solve that and increase the voices of the creators. So thankfully the economy itself is only growing and getting more powerful, and we intend to help enable that along the way.
Cool. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today, and sharing a bit more about Nerve, and what brought you to create this and what problems you're looking to solve. It's I'm almost tempted now to kind of change careers and become a musician if I had a musical bone in my body, because I'd love to have a banking experience that's like that much tailored to my needs. I think it's super exciting. And I think, even if we just look broader at the kind of freelance, self-employed market, I've been freelancing for 4 years now, and we've been underserved. And there's plenty of interesting propositions that are like helping us with taxes and everything, but taking it one step further, I think for creators and artists, it's long overdue and very important. So all the best to you. And where can our listeners find out more about Nerve?
Just go to nerve.pro. I know it's a weird URL, isn't it? But there is a such thing as a .pro. Nice. Nerve.pro, NERVE.pro. And there's a link there. Download the app. Get that app, man. Open up an account and share it with your friends.
Nice. Thank you. I have one last question, I promise. Where did the name come from?
Well, we hired a multi-million-dollar branding firm to come up with it. Nice. No, I'm just kidding. Unfortunately, there's no fun story. It's just, to be quite frank, we thought it was a great name. And, it kind of goes along with the fact, like, who would ever have the nerve to build a to build a bank for musicians.
Nice. I love it.
And so we did.
Don't forget it. That's for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, super. Thank you so much again, John. And thank you to our listeners. This was Breaking Banks Europe, episode 112, everything to do with niche banking. So thank you again, and it's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.